Okay then, welcome to Getting Baked. I'm your Uncle Josh, and I make baking fun. At any rate, today we're going to make a really simple white bread, same day white bread. Takes about 7 hours start to finish. So, before we get started, we're going to talk tools. You're going to need a food scale. You're going to need a little baby postal scale. Some of you know why you have this in your home. We're going to need salt, yeast, flour, and water. So that's about it. This recipe calls for 500 grams of flour, and we're going to do a 75% hydration. We're going to start with our water first because we're going to mix our salt and our yeast right into the water to speed things along. So we're going to turn on our scale, our big scale that is. Food scale. We're going to put our glass on there. We're going to zero it out to 0 grams. But we're not quite ready to add our water there yet. We're going to turn on our little scale first. We're going to measure out 10.5 grams of salt to go with our 1 loaf of white bread. So we're going to pour the salt. And we've overdone it a bit. Easy to do. Still overdone it a bit. Now we're at just a little over 11. Here we go, we're at about 10.6 grams of salt. We're going to call that good enough. We're going to go ahead and put this right into our cup that we're going to put our water into. We'll go ahead and re-zero that back out. Set that aside. Okay, now we need our yeast. We're going to use 2 grams of instant dry yeast. If you have active dry yeast, I imagine you can substitute it, but I don't know how. So good luck with that. We're going to re-zero our scale. We want 2 grams of our instant dry yeast. And right there I've got 2.03 grams, so that's wonderful. We're going to go ahead and add that to our salt in our jar, and we are going to re-zero this scale out to 0 grams. Now again, we're going to use 500 grams of flour, and we're looking for a 75% hydration, which comes out to 375 grams of water. And we want our water at approximately 90 degrees, perhaps a little bit warmer, depending on how warm you keep your home. We have it about 74 degrees in here. If you keep your house closer to 70, you might want your water to be closer to 95 degrees here to begin. And anyway, mine's sitting here at 89.5, which I'm going to call good enough. So we'll turn the thermometer off. All right. And now I've got this salt and yeast already in here, but it's zeroed out, and I'm looking again for 375 grams of water. So I'm going to start pouring. 200, 300, 67, 70, 74, 375 grams. All right, so we've got our water measured out. We're good to go there. We're going to do one last thing with this. We're done with our baby scale for now. We can get this set aside. We're going to get a little spoon. And we're going to give this salt and yeast and water mixture a nice little stir. And just let the yeast and salt start to dissolve in the water a tiny bit as we measure out our flour. So that, I believe, is good there. Now for our flour, we're just going to use our big food scale again. We're going to set our tub. You could use a bowl. You could use whatever you have on hand. These Cambro tubs are nice because once we have our dough, we're going to be able to see visually once it's doubled, tripled, etc. in size. So that's why we like to be able to see through there. We're going to go ahead and zero this out. Again, now we're looking for our 500 grams of flour. And today I'm just using all-purpose flour. 2 reasons for that. One, we're all kind of on lockdown, and it's hard to find the fancier flours that I kind of prefer. But 2, everybody has all-purpose flour in their cupboard, so this would give you all a chance to make something at home with what you've already got lying around, ideally. So we're looking for 500 grams. We're at 490. We're at 502 there. I'll just take a tiny bit out. All right, we're at 500 grams. Set the flour aside. And for now, we're done with the big scale as well, so we'll turn that off. Other things you might need is a dough scraper. That's another tool we're going to use here in a second. My scale's done, my other scale's done. Yeah, all right, we're good to go. So you can see this is kind of turned kind of salty, milky looking. Part of that's the salt, part of that's the yeast starting to activate. Again, I've got this right around 90 degrees. If your house is say 70 degrees, you might want it closer to 95. For some reason, you know, you live in a place and your doors are open and it's 80 degrees, you're going to want it probably cooler than that. So keep that in mind. Now all we got to do is we got to mix this all together. So what I like to do is I basically use my 3 or 4 fingers kind of as a paddle. I'm just going to dump all the water, salt and yeast into our container. Now again, I'm going to start maybe with 3 fingers and I'm going to get my pinky in there as I have to scrape it down off the sides, and you'll see that here pretty soon. And we're just going to mix this till it's what they would call shaggy, which basically means everything's pretty well incorporated, but we're not trying to get to where it's a smooth dough or anything like that. Another thing that's nice about these tubs, you can see I'm able to spin it around as I'm mixing, and that kind of helps you scrape the sides down and get all the flour incorporated, because you do want to make sure that in this process the main thing is just to get it all incorporated. You know, we don't want spots of dry flour and spots of wet flour. Now you're going to get shaggy on your fingers too. That's where a dough scraper comes in real handy. If you don't have a dough scraper, you can kind of pinch 2 fingers on your hand together and just kind of scrape down like that, and then kind of, you know, hopefully get it to stick to the dough in the tub already. But the dough scraper is real nice. You're going to want one eventually. So we'll just keep scraping this off my fingers for a second. We've got a lot more mixing to do here before it's well incorporated. But as you might guess, the wetter parts of the dough tend to stick to your hands a lot more than the drier parts. So when I get back in here, I'm going to kind of go around the edges. I'm going to try to get some of this dry flour onto my hands first, and then we'll work that into the dough a little bit. Once we start getting it really incorporated, you'll be able to kind of pick it up, and you'll want to kind of pinch it, so to speak, just to kind of get everything the same amount of hydration, I guess. A lot of the breads that I'll eventually do on this channel will be hydrated before we add the salt and yeast and things of that nature. Again, I'm starting with a really simple recipe, knowing that a lot of my friends and people out there are just kind of on lockdown with not much to do, and maybe you've got all this stuff laying around in your house and you could make a nice loaf of bread for dinner tomorrow night. So, all right, we got a lot of shaggy all over my fingers again, but we do have about the right mix by now. So we're nearly finished with this part of our video. Let me get this stuff off of me. It's so sticky. But anyway, this is a really, again, simple same day dough. So we're not even going to need this. I generally don't need any of my breads. I fold them, but that's kind of what you would do in place of kneading. But this is a no knead recipe. We're not going to do anything to it. Once I get my fingers scraped off here, we are going to put a lid on this, and it's going to sit here for 5 hours, roughly, until it is about roughly tripled in size. So let me get this out of the way real quickly. I've got sticky on me, but you can see it's not quite filling the entire, width of the tub or circumference of the tub, but we can see roughly how tall it is. It's maybe up to the quart line, but it's not even completely spread out. So in about 5 hours, it should be at least doubled, possibly tripled. Somewhere in there is about perfect. And I'm going to wash my hands and put a lid on this, and we'll be back in about 5 hours. All right, so it's been 5 hours. We're back. I'm still your Uncle Josh, and I still make baking fun. We've got our super simple same day white dough. You can tell it's at least doubled inside, if not in size, if not tripled, which is exactly what we're looking for. So 5 hours later, we're right on target. Everything looks good. Now our next step, we have to turn this into basically into a dough ball, right? So we can turn it into a loaf. Actually, before we do that, our first step, we need to preheat our oven. Forgive me. We're going to set the oven to about 475 degrees. And this is where another tool comes into play, because you want an oven thermometer so that you know how warm it actually is in your oven. Because they don't run to the temp they say they do, and they generally take a lot longer to preheat to the temp that they say they do. Especially mine, we live in a crappy apartment. So anyway, next step, the oven is on. It's set at 480 degrees in my case, because my oven runs about 5 degrees cold. That's going to preheat for an hour. Second step there, I almost missed, forgive me, is we're going to take our cast iron pot with its lid, right here. 4-quart cast iron pot with a lid. We're going to preheat this in the oven the entire time. Now the reason for the cast iron pot and the lid are to trap the moisture in the loaf from evaporating. It traps it all in there. It allows the loaf to basically rise more and develops a bit more of a crispier, crunchier crust, if that's something you're into. Anyway, that's what we're doing. So our next step, oven's preheating with the cast iron pot and lid inside. We need to get our dough out onto this counter, and we need to put it into our proofing basket and proof it for about an hour once we shape it into a loaf. So what we're going to do is we're going to dust about half of this surface with a little bit of flour. I'm going to leave the other half blank, at least as much as I can, because we're going to use both sides of that then to make our loaf. So we'll start by sprinkling flour over here. Be generous. It doesn't hurt. We're going to rub it into our hands a little bit too, because we're going to be handling this dough. And we don't want it to stick to us any more than it has to, right? So that looks about good to me. We don't need this right now. Next step is we're going to do the same thing in our tub. We're going to sprinkle some dough around the edges here. Fairly generous amount. Or flour, sorry, around the edges of the dough. Fairly generous amount. We don't want to go crazy. Then we'll start pulling it away from the sides of the tub. Throw some more flour in there. Pull it away a little more. It's going to stick to your fingers. It gets a little messy. But once we've got it separated from the sides of the tub, which we just about do here, we'll give our hands one more quick flour, right? We're going to gently ease this thing right out of the sky, I think. Just gonna let it fall down in my left hand here. We're gonna drop it down there. All right. On top of this, needs a little bit of flour. Some of the gluten's kind of stretched out, but it's okay. Okay, so we're gonna kind of pat that in there. Flip it over once. We're gonna lay it out kind of flat. I'm gonna do that one more time. All right, I'm gonna get rid of that. Now we've got this floured side. This is a different kind of dough scraper you might be interested in. It's really good for cutting. Often I make 2 loaves at a time. When you make 2 loaves at a time, if you need to cut your lump of dough I have right here in half, this comes in real handy. So that's that. And here we go. So we've got this guy. Now we're going to try to make this into a dough ball, right? So how do we do that? We're going to fold it. And we never folded this dough at the beginning, which normally we do at some point, but we're just going to fold it over itself. Once, grab another piece twice, another piece 3 times, another piece 4 times, another piece 5 times, okay? We're going to flip it over. Now this is still a fairly floured area, right? We want our hands to be fairly floured. We want our dough to be fairly floured, okay? Now we've got basically kind of looks like a triangle. And now we're going to pull this over into a non-floured area of the counter. We're just going to kind of cup our hands around it, kind of underneath it, especially with your pinkies, and you're going to hold that part in. But you're going to pull, and it's going to just kind of tighten everything up around everywhere. You do that a few times, and we're going to end up with a real nice tight ball. This is quite sticky, so it's working quite well. And here you can see suddenly what was once a big flat thing is a little bit more of a ball shape now. So now we need our proofing basket. Flour that up real nice. Flour up our loaf real nice on top. We're going to be generous with this, right? And we're going to pick it up real gently and we're going to drop it in the proofing basket. Okay? Plenty of flour on top. Can't tell if you can see it or not. Anyway, so that's all we got to do for now. Next steps, we're going to let this sit. I'm going to wet this towel on my shoulder with some cold water. And I'm going to lay it over this basket. It's going to proof here for about an hour. And we'll come back and we'll make sure that it's done. And our oven's already preheating with our cast iron pot in tow. So I don't think there's much else to do for the moment other than say thanks. I'm going to wet this towel. I'm going to cover this and I'll see you guys in 1 hour. All right, so it's been an hour, nearly an hour, close enough. At any rate, we've got our proofed loaf here. We're going to dust the top of it just a tiny bit, and we're going to make sure it's ready to go. And the way we make sure it's ready to go is we really dust one particular area with flour, and we're going to just poke our finger in there. We're going to see how it responds, okay? And if it comes back right away, it's nowhere near ready. If it comes back slowly, as this is doing, it's about right. Slowly and not quite all the way. If it doesn't come back at all, you've probably let it go too long. However, sometimes you can still save it by dumping it out, punching the air out, refolding it, but we'll get into that later. At any rate, this one's about ready to go. So I'm going to dust a little area over here. We're going to get this loaf out. Then we're going to get our cast iron pot out of the oven with oven mitts. This is the dangerous part. and then we're gonna bake it. The loaf is gonna bake for about 30 minutes with the lid on in the cast iron pot, and then for about 12 to 15 minutes more without the lid. This particular dough, I turn the temperature down. We set it at 475 to start. Once we throw it in, we're going to turn it down to 450. And the only reason for that is because it's all-purpose flour. I like to, make a nice soft white bread that the kids like. Kind of that sort of thing, I suppose. Keep everything real simple, and we're not looking for a great deal of char or artisan out of this, I guess. So, anyway, we're about ready. We got this dusted up. We've got a little bit of flour over here. We're just going to dump it upside down. Bam. All right, we've already got a very pretty looking loaf of bread right there. So our next step, we're going to get our gloves. Oven mitts, rather. We're going to get our pot out. I'm going to leave the lid on the stove. I'm going to bring the cast iron pot over here. Keep in mind this is 475 degrees warm. You want to be very careful. I'm going to spin this loaf around. I'm going to shape it just a tiny bit. It looks very pretty already. I don't feel like I need to do too much. We're going to give it a little dusting of flour on top, just for good measure. All right, pat that down. Scoop over and make a little bit of a circle around it. Basically doing what we did before when we were turning it into a loaf. All right, and at this point, this is not necessary, but it's fun. We're going to score it 3 times with a razor blade. Be very careful. 1, 2, 3 deep cuts across the top there. Once again, we're going to just spin it around. Those cuts actually help release some of the moisture in the dough so that it steams up better inside the pot while it's cooking. So we'll drop that in. Next step, we'll get our gloves back on. If we need to, we can jiggle it around a tiny bit to get it a little more even in the pan. We're gonna get our lid, put the lid back on. Open our oven back up. This is all gonna go back in the oven. Middle rack. Again, we're set at 475. I'm gonna immediately turn it down to 450 right now. The only reason for that is because I like this bread to come out a little bit more blonde, right? So at this point, when it's in the pot, or in the cast iron Dutch oven rather, it's going to steam. It's going to do what it's going to do. But once we take that lid off, which we're going to do in 30 minutes, then it's going to cook at a slower rate at that point. So I'm going to set the timer for 30 minutes. At which point we're going to come back and we're going to take the lid off of the Dutch oven, leave it on the middle rack. I didn't mention earlier we have the second shelf in the oven on the lowest rack. When we do that, we're going to take the lid off the Dutch oven. We're going to put it on the lowest rack right underneath the Dutch oven. And what that does is kind of help the bottom crust from not burning too much from the direct heat that comes from the bottom burners of the oven. At least in my oven. So that's where we're at. We got 30 minutes into it. Take the lid off. I don't think I'm going to make a video for that because, yeah. But I'll be back in about 40 to 45 minutes when we pull it out of the oven and we have a loaf of bread. So we'll see you then. All right, so here we are. We baked for 30 minutes in the Dutch oven with the lid on. Took the lid off about 10 and a half minutes ago, apparently. and put the lid underneath the Dutch oven. It's continuing to cook at about 450 degrees right now. But it's about done. I just took a peek at it, so we're gonna get it out. Let's see. I am not quite prepared. Apologies. All right. So again, trick here is everything's very hot, everything's very dangerous, but we're gonna have a beautiful loaf of bread out here in just 1 second. Let me get my gloves. I will turn off the timer in the oven. All right. We've got a nice loaf. It's beautiful. It's got a little bit of char on the very top of it, but it rose up very nicely. We're going to dump it out. Our bottom isn't extremely burnt. That's part of the lid underneath the pot. I should do it, but we'll set it down there. Looks like a beautiful loaf of bread to me. I'm going to grab this, put it back in the oven. Safety first. Now the oven can just heat up the house for a little bit of a while, but yeah, so here we go. We've got a nice, simple white loaf of bread. Did you get a little bit more char than I would have guessed on top of there, but that's okay. What do you do next? Well, first of all, it's not done cooking, so it needs to rest for at least 20 to 30 minutes because it's still cooking the bread inside because there's so much heat in there. Something that's fun is you can sometimes hear it crackle, and it's starting to crackle, but now I realize the television's been on this whole time, so that probably sucks, but nobody will hear that. But it smells great. Slightly buttery. It's making noise. It smells like rice. It sounds like Rice Krispies. And it's very warm. And it's beautiful. One way to tell if a loaf is done, I'm sure this one is by looking at it, but the one way to tell is if you hit it on the bottom, it should sound like a hollow drum. So we'll just turn this over real quick. Sounds like a hollow drum to me. It's very, very hot, so you don't want to do that too much. But yeah, that sounds like a hollow drum to me. Also, that beats a little bit of the flour off of it where it doesn't need to be. So yeah, but it's still a little hot for that. But all right, so we'll call that a night, and then I guess we'll cut into this in the morning. 7 hours, I said. We started this right here at 7 p.m. It is 2 a.m. right now. I should have started in the morning. I understand that, but so yeah, 7-hour bread. That's all I got. That's all I got. All right, we're back. We've got our loaf thoroughly cooled overnight. Put it in plastic a little bit earlier today. Keep it in a plastic bag. It softens the outside of the crust, makes it a lot easier to not only slice but also to eat. So anyway, we'll get started here. We'll cut into this and we'll see how it looks. So all looks pretty good to me. All right. So you can see we've got pretty big bubbles in there on both sides. Has a nice, very slightly buttery kind of smell to it. I guess all that's left to do would be to make some grilled cheese sandwiches, but I'm not going to do that now. So thanks for watching, everybody. Maybe you learned something. You definitely learned that by 2 a.m. I've had enough to drink. So until next time, we're going to make pizza next time, same day pizza. That'll be fun. A couple of days from now. Enjoy. Thanks.